rich elites at the corner table snickered when the exhausted single father dropped a plastic sippy cup on the polished marble floor. To them, he was just a scruffy, tired nobody who clearly didn't belong in their exclusive high-end world. They had no idea they were mocking a ghost, a highly decorated former Tier 1 operator trying to live a quiet life. But when armed mercenaries kicked in the front doors targeting the billionaire CEO sitting nearby, the laughing stopped.
Are just precious.
In exactly 2 seconds, everything changed. The rain in Boston was unforgiving that Tuesday morning, beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gilded Bean Café in the heart of the financial district. This wasn't the kind of coffee shop where a person ordered a simple drip coffee to go. This was a sanctuary for the city's elite. At $6 for a basic espresso, the clientele consisted mainly of venture capitalists in bespoke suits, tech executives, and old money socialites. Vivian Sterling sat at her usual secluded table in the back corner. At 32, she was the CEO and majority shareholder of Sterling Aerospace, a multi-billion-dollar defense and aviation firm she had inherited and ruthlessly expanded. Vivian was wearing a tailored charcoal pantsuit, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning a quarterly earnings report on her tablet. Her security detail, a discreet man named Walter, sat 2 tables away, blending in perfectly. Vivian liked the Gilded Bean because it was quiet, exclusive, and strictly enforced a code of decorum until the bells above the door chimed, and in walked Elijah Brooks. Elijah looked out of place the second his boots touched the imported Italian marble floor. He was a tall black man in his mid-30s, his rich, dark skin weathered by sun and time. He wore a faded olive green jacket, a simple white t-shirt, and worn-out denim jeans. His short cropped hair was slightly unkempt, framing a strong jawline covered in a few days of rough stubble. A small silver chain rested against his collarbone, a memento that had once belonged to his late mother. But it was the little girl holding his hand who drew the most attention. 5-year-old Zoe was wearing a bright yellow raincoat and matching rubber boots that squeaked loudly with every step. Her hair had been carefully styled into 2 neat puffs, decorated with yellow ribbons, the kind of patient mourning work that only a devoted father would attempt. She was clutching a worn-out stuffed bear and babbling happily about a cartoon she had watched that morning. Elijah looked completely exhausted. The deep bags under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights, a common symptom of being a single father trying to hold the world together for his child. He had promised Zoe a fancy hot chocolate after her dentist appointment, not realizing the kind of establishment they had just stumbled into. "Daddy, look. The pastries have gold on them," Zoe gasped, pointing her small, sticky finger at the display case of $20 croissants decorated with edible gold leaf. "I see it, Bug." Elijah replied, his voice a low, soothing baritone, the same voice his own father had used with him on cold Montana mornings. "Let's just get your hot chocolate and head home okay." At a large table near the center of the cafe sat Hunter Davenport, a junior partner at a prominent hedge fund flanked by 3 of his impeccably groomed colleagues. Hunter was the kind of man who measured a person's worth by the brand of their watch. He took one look at Elijah and sneered. "Look at this guy," Hunter muttered loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Did he get lost on the way to the soup kitchen? This place used to have standards." His colleagues chuckled, swirling their expensive lattes. Vivian, sitting in the corner, frowned. She hated men like Hunter, loud, arrogant, and entirely useless in any real crisis. She glanced at Elijah, expecting him to shrink under the weight of the mockery. Instead, Elijah didn't even blink. He didn't puff out his chest. He didn't glare. He simply ignored them with a profound, almost unnatural stillness. And here is something worth pausing on for a moment. There is a particular kind of patience that some men carry, the kind that isn't learned in a self-help book or a weekend retreat. It is forged in places where reacting to every insult could get you killed, or where you've simply heard worse from people who didn't matter and refused to give them rent in your head. Elijah Brooks had spent decades learning that the loudest man in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. The dangerous ones are quiet. They listen. His eyes, however, casually swept the room. In less than a second, Vivian noticed him register the exits, the staff, Walter, the bodyguard, and the structural pillars. It was an unconscious habit, the kind of situational awareness you couldn't turn off. At the counter, disaster struck. As Elijah handed the barista a crumpled $20 bill, Zoe excitedly reached for her massive whipped cream-topped hot chocolate. Her small hand slipped. The ceramic mug hit the marble floor with a resounding crash, shattering into dozens of pieces. Hot, sticky chocolate splashed across the pristine floor and onto the expensive leather shoes of Hunter Davenport, who had just walked up to the counter to complain about his order. "Are you kidding me?" Hunter shouted, jumping back as if he had been burned with acid. "Watch what you're doing, you little brat!" Zoe flinched, her lower lip trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. Elijah immediately dropped to one knee, ignoring Hunter completely. His large, work-calloused, dark hands moved with surprising gentleness as he pulled a napkin from his pocket and began wiping the hot chocolate off his daughter's yellow boots. "It's okay, Zoe. It was an accident. Don't cry, baby. I'm not mad." Elijah whispered softly, kissing her forehead, the silver chain swinging slightly against his shirt. Hunter was turning red. "Not mad. She just ruined a $1,000 pair of Oxfords. You don't belong in here, pal. Why don't you take your kid back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of?" The cafe fell dead silent. The baristas froze. Vivian's jaw tightened. She was half a second away from standing up and ending Hunter's career with a single phone call. Elijah slowly stood up. He stood 6'2", but he didn't try to intimidate Hunter. He looked at the angry finance bro with the tired patience of a man who had seen the absolute worst of humanity and found this display incredibly boring. "Send me the bill for the shoes," Elijah said quietly, his voice dangerously calm. "But if you raise your voice at my daughter again, I'm going to fold you in half." Hunter laughed a harsh, mocking sound. "Oh, a tough guy. What are you going to do, lumberjack? You look like you haven't slept in a week. I could drop you before you even raised your hands." The sheer delusion of the statement hung in the air. Vivian, watching closely, saw something in Elijah's eyes shift. It wasn't anger. It was a cold, calculating geometry. He was looking at Hunter's center of gravity, the unprotected throat, the completely unbalanced stance. Elijah didn't want to hurt the man. He just knew exactly how long it would take if he had to. Before Elijah could respond, the heavy glass doors of the cafe didn't just open. They shattered inward. The crash of breaking glass was deafening, silencing Hunter's arrogant laughter instantly. A heavy black SUV had violently hopped the curb, smashing directly into the front vestibule of the cafe. Rain and cold wind howled through the shattered entrance. 3 men stepped through the broken glass, moving with terrifying, synchronized precision. They weren't common street thugs holding up a register for petty cash. They were dressed in dark tactical clothing, their faces obscured by black balaclavas. The lead man carried a suppressed compact submachine gun, while the other 2 held heavily modified sidearms. "Nobody moves. Down on the floor right now." The lead gunman barked, his voice muffled by the mask, but projecting undeniable authority. Panic erupted. The wealthy patrons who seconds ago had felt invincible in their bubble of luxury now screamed and dove for cover. Hunter Davenport, the man who had just threatened Elijah, let out a high-pitched shriek and threw himself to the marble floor, crawling frantically behind the pastry counter, completely abandoning his friends. This was a targeted hit. Vivian knew it instantly. Sterling Aerospace had recently secured a highly classified government contract, outmaneuvering a notoriously corrupt private military contractor. She had received death threats for weeks. Her security detail, Walter, reached into his jacket, drawing his weapon, but he was too far across the room. One of the gunmen spotted the movement. "Gun!" the mercenary shouted, firing a suppressed 3-round burst. The rounds chewed through the plaster pillar right next to Walter, forcing the bodyguard to dive behind a heavy mahogany table, effectively pinning him down. The lead mercenary locked eyes on Vivian. "There she is. Grab the target. Kill anyone who gets in the way." The third man, a massive bruiser holding a heavy .45 caliber pistol, started storming down the aisle toward Vivian. His path took him directly past the counter, directly past Elijah and a crying Zoe. Most people freeze in a crisis. The brain, overwhelmed by sudden trauma, struggles to process the adrenaline, leaving the body paralyzed. The wealthy patrons of the Gilded Bean were frozen. Hunter was openly sobbing behind the espresso machine. Elijah Brooks did not freeze. For the last 3 years, Elijah had been dad. He had been the man who changed diapers, attended parent-teacher conferences, and watched animated movies. But before Zoe, Elijah was a ghost. He was an operator for the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta Force. He had spent a decade operating in the most hostile, unforgiving environments on the planet. He didn't panic. His heart rate didn't spike. It actually steadied. His mind slipped seamlessly into a state of hyper-focused combat geometry. Threat 1 moving down the aisle. Threat 2 covering the bodyguard. Threat 3 sweeping the left flank. As the massive mercenary rushed past, Elijah moved. He didn't yell. He didn't adopt a fighting stance. He simply acted. Elijah shoved Zoe hard under the reinforced steel counter out of the line of fire. In the same fluid motion, Elijah grabbed the heavy, thick-bottomed ceramic sugar dispenser off the closest table. It took exactly 2 seconds. 1. Elijah stepped into the massive mercenary's blind spot. He didn't punch. He brought the heavy glass sugar dispenser down with devastating calculated force against the side of the mercenary's skull, perfectly striking the temporal bone. The glass shattered. The man's eyes rolled back in his head, his nervous system instantly short-circuiting. 2. As the unconscious mercenary began to crumple, Elijah caught the man's falling arm. With a brutal twisting motion, Elijah stripped the .45 caliber pistol from the man's grip before his knees even hit the floor. Elijah spun, dropping low to minimize his profile. The lead gunman, hearing the scuffle, turned toward Elijah, raising his submachine gun. He was too slow. Elijah fired twice. He didn't aim with one eye closed like a target shooter. He fired with both eyes open, relying on years of muscle memory. Pop, pop. 2 rounds struck the lead gunman's center mass, dropping him instantly to the floor. The final mercenary, the one pinning down Walter, whipped around, realizing his team had just been decimated in the blink of an eye. He leveled his weapon at Elijah. Vivian watched in absolute awe. Elijah didn't flinch. He sidestepped smoothly, creating a moving target, and fired one single, precise shot. The round caught the 3rd mercenary in the shoulder of his gun arm. The man screamed, dropping his weapon and collapsing against the wall. Silence rushed back into the cafe, broken only by the sound of the rain outside and the whimpering of the wealthy patrons. It had taken less than 5 seconds from the moment Elijah pushed his daughter under the counter to the moment the room was secured. The 3 highly trained mercenaries were bleeding out or unconscious on the floor. Elijah stood there, the heavy pistol held perfectly in a high-ready retention stance, his eyes scanning the shattered storefront for a secondary assault team. His posture was totally transformed. The tired, slouching father was gone. In his place stood an apex predator, a man vibrating with lethal, controlled energy. Vivian slowly stood up from behind her table. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Hunter, who was curled into a fetal position, crying silently, completely covered in spilled coffee and shame. Then she looked at Elijah. "Clear," Elijah muttered to himself. He engaged the safety on the pistol and placed it carefully on a nearby table, ensuring it was out of reach of the downed men. He immediately dropped back down to his hands and knees, looking under the counter. The lethal predator vanished, and the gentle father returned instantly. "Zoe Bug, are you okay?" he asked softly. Zoe crawled out, trembling, clutching her stuffed bear. "Daddy, it was loud." "I know, baby, I know. I covered your ears. Let's go home now, okay?" Elijah picked her up, burying her face in his neck so she wouldn't see the blood on the floor. Without thinking, he began humming a low, slow melody against her ear, an old hymn his grandmother used to sing on the porch in the summer evenings of his childhood. One of those songs that lives in a family longer than the people who first sang it. Zoe's small body slowly stopped trembling. Walter, Vivian's bodyguard, finally broke cover, his gun drawn, looking around in utter shock. He had a military background himself, former Rangers, and he knew exactly what he had just witnessed. That wasn't luck. That was top-tier elite tactical training. "Hey!" Walter called out, aiming his weapon at the door. "Who the hell are you? The cops are on their way. You need to stay." Elijah paused at the back exit of the cafe. He didn't turn around. "I don't have time for a police report. My kid needs a nap." Without another word, Elijah Brooks pushed open the heavy steel fire door and vanished into the rainy Boston alleyway, leaving the shattered cafe and a stunned billionaire CEO behind. If there is one thing worth carrying out of this scene, it is this. We spend so much of our lives sorting people by their packaging, by the cut of their jacket, by the price of their shoes, by how tired they look on a Tuesday morning. And almost every time, the most important person in the room is the one we are least likely to notice. The man in the worn boots may have carried more weight than we will ever know. The tired father wiping chocolate off a small yellow boot may be the only reason the room is still standing 5 minutes later. Maybe the kindest thing we can do for ourselves and for each other is to be a little slower to decide who matters. The aftermath of the cafe assault was a media circus, but Vivian Sterling was a master at controlling the narrative. Within 20 minutes, her crisis management team had cordoned off the Gilded Bean. The police arrived, took the surviving mercenaries into custody, and began processing the scene. Vivian sat in the back of her armored Maybach, wrapped in a shock blanket she didn't really need. Her mind was racing, replaying those 2 seconds of violence over and over. She had spent her entire life surrounded by powerful men, CEOs, senators, generals, and private security contractors. She knew what manufactured toughness looked like. Hunter Davenport and his expensive suits were a prime example of fake power. But the man in the faded olive jacket, the man who had gently wiped hot chocolate off his daughter's boots while being verbally abused only to turn around and dismantle a hit squad with his bare hands. That was a terrifying, beautiful display of real power. Walter climbed into the front seat of the Maybach, pulling the door shut against the rain. He looked shaken. "The police have the shooters," Walter reported, running a hand over his face. Private contractors ex-military were running their prints, but it looks like the hit was funded by Apex Defense Systems. Vivian nodded slowly. Apex Defense Systems was her biggest rival in the aerospace defense sector. They had just lost a $10 billion government contract to her. Assassination was a desperate, messy escalation. "And the man with the little girl?" Vivian asked, her voice steady. Walter paused, looking back at her through the partition. "Ma'am, I've been in the security game a long time. The way that guy moved the economy of motion, the target acquisition, that wasn't a cop. That wasn't standard military. That guy is Tier 1 Special Missions Unit. I pulled the cafe security footage before the cops grabbed the servers." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "I want to know who he is, Walter." "Ma'am, with all due respect, guys who move like that and disappear into alleys don't want to be found." He walked away to avoid the police for a reason. Probably doesn't want his face on the news. "He saved my life," Vivian stated flatly. "And Hunter Davenport insulted him. Find him. Use the company's intelligence apparatus. Bribe the city cameras if you have to. I want a name." It took Walter and a team of Sterling Aerospace's best cyber analysts 3 days. They had to track Elijah backward from the alleyway using traffic cameras, ATM cameras, and facial recognition software. When they finally got a ping on his face, the results were incredibly frustrating. His military file was heavily classified. It was a digital ghost town, pages and pages of black ink and redacted operations. On Thursday evening, Walter walked into Vivian's sprawling penthouse office overlooking the Boston skyline. He dropped a thin manila folder onto her glass desk. "You found him," Vivian said, not looking up from her laptop. "His name is Elijah Brooks," Walter said, taking a seat. 36 years old. Grew up just outside Billings, Montana. His father was a steelworker, his mother a high school teacher, both passed before he turned 25. He enlisted in the Army at 18, made it to the Rangers, then got tapped for Delta Force. He spent 10 years doing things that don't officially exist. 4 bronze stars, 2 purple hearts. His file is a wall of classified redactions. Vivian opened the folder. Inside was a military portrait of a younger Elijah, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. His eyes were the same hard, analytical, unyielding. "Why did he leave?" she asked softly. "His wife," Walter replied, his tone softening. "Monique Brooks, born Monique Carter. She was a pediatric nurse. They met at a base hospital in Georgia when he was recovering from a deployment injury. She died 3 years ago in a car accident here in Boston. A drunk driver ran a red light. Elijah was deployed in Syria when it happened. He came home, buried his wife, honorably discharged immediately, and took sole custody of his daughter, Zoe. Since then, he's been off the grid. Works as a freelance carpenter, fixes up old houses, keeps his head down, lives in a modest 2-bedroom house in the Jamaica Plain neighborhood. Vivian stared at the photograph. Then she flipped through the file and paused on a second photo. This one from a family album the analysts had quietly pulled. Monique with locks pulled back, holding a newborn Zoe in a hospital bed, Elijah's arm around them both. A whole family complete in that small frame. A man who had survived the most dangerous combat zones on Earth only to have his world shattered by a random tragedy at home. A man who had traded a rifle for a tool belt to raise his little girl, swallowing his pride while trust fund brats mocked him in coffee shops. There is a particular weight carried by men like Elijah, and by many people whose names we will never know. We tend to think of soldiers as the ones who pay the price for the wars we send them to. But sometimes the heaviest blow does not come from the enemy. It comes through a phone call in the middle of the night in a language no training prepared them for. The world keeps asking these men to be strong, and they keep showing up. We forget sometimes that strength is not the absence of pain. It is what a person decides to build with what is left of them after the pain arrives. "Hunter Davenport," Vivian said, suddenly closing the folder. "Is he still handling the portfolio for the Sterling Pension Fund?" Walter smiled thinly. "Yes, ma'am. His hedge fund manages about 400 million of our employee assets." "Pull it," Vivian ordered coldly. "First thing tomorrow morning, call Hunter's senior partners. Tell them we are liquidating our position with their firm completely, and make sure they know exactly why. I want Hunter Davenport fired and blacklisted from every financial institution on the East Coast by noon." "Consider it done," Walter said. "And what about Mr. Brooks?" Vivian stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window. The rain had stopped and the city lights glittered below. She had built an empire by identifying high-value assets and securing them. But Elijah Brooks wasn't a corporate asset. He was a man who had protected a stranger without a second thought. "Clear my schedule for tomorrow morning," Vivian said, a small, determined smile playing on her lips. "I need to hire a carpenter. Before we move on, perhaps it is worth taking a quiet breath here. The world tends to repay loud kindness loudly and quiet courage with silence. Most of the people who keep things steady around us, the single parents, the night shift workers, the veterans on the next bus seat, the neighbor who shovels 2 driveways instead of 1, are never written about. If you are lucky enough to recognize one of them even just for a moment today, that recognition is its own small act of decency. You don't have to fix anyone's life. Sometimes seeing them clearly is already a kind of gift. By 9 a.m. the following morning, Hunter Davenport's life as a high-flying finance executive was officially over. Vivian Sterling did not make idle threats. With a single phone call from her executive suite, she withdrew Sterling Aerospace's $400 million pension fund from Hunter's firm. When the senior partners frantically begged for a reason, Vivian forwarded them the Café security footage, explicitly stating that any firm employing a man who screamed at a 5-year-old child lacked the ethical judgment to handle her company's money. Hunter's keycard was deactivated before he even finished his morning latte. He was escorted out of his glass office by 2 burly security guards, publicly humiliated and quietly blacklisted by every major financial institution in New England. Vivian didn't feel a shred of remorse. In her world, actions had consequences. At 2 p.m., Vivian's armored Maybach pulled into the quiet tree-lined streets of the Jamaica Plain neighborhood. This was a stark contrast to the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Boston. Here, century-old craftsman houses sat behind white picket fences, and the air smelled of salt from the nearby Boston Harbor and blooming hydrangeas. Walter parked the massive luxury vehicle in front of a modest 2-story house that was currently undergoing extensive renovations. Scaffolding hugged the front porch, and a pile of fresh 2x4s sat neatly on the lawn. A small chalk drawing of a sun and 3 stick figures decorated the cement walkway, signed Zoe in proud, uneven letters. "Wait here, Walter," Vivian instructed, stepping out of the car. She was dressed down today, or at least her version of it. She wore a tailored beige trench coat, dark designer denim, and sensible leather boots, carrying a brightly colored shopping bag. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of a hammer echoed from the backyard. Vivian followed the sound, stepping carefully over stray extension cords and piles of sawdust. She found Elijah Brooks working on a large, custom-built cedar deck. He was wearing a faded gray t-shirt that clung to his broad shoulders, dusted with wood shavings. Sweat glistened on his dark skin as he drove nails into the wood with terrifying mechanical precision. Without the bulky jacket he had worn at the cafe, the physical toll of his past life was faintly visible. A jagged, faded scar ran up his left bicep, disappearing under the sleeve of his shirt. On his other forearm, a small tattoo in elegant script read simply, "Monique. Zoe. You have a terrible habit of sneaking up on people, Ms. Sterling," Elijah said, not even turning around. Vivian stopped in her tracks, surprised. "How did you know it was me? I didn't say a word." Elijah finally stopped hammering and turned to face her. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, his piercing hazel eyes locking onto hers. "Your boots. Leather soles on concrete too heavy for a kid, too light for a contractor. Plus, there's a 3-ton armored German tank parked out front casting a shadow over my neighbor's petunias. You aren't exactly covert." Vivian offered a small, appreciative smile. "Fair enough. I see my security team isn't the only one capable of doing a little background research." "I didn't need a team," Elijah replied, stepping off the half-finished deck and grabbing a towel to wipe his hands. "You're the CEO of Sterling Aerospace. Your face is on the cover of Forbes half the time. After yesterday, I made it my business to know exactly whose war I accidentally walked into." "It wasn't an accident, Mr. Brooks," Vivian said, her tone turning serious. "You saved my life. You saved my bodyguard's life. I came here to thank you properly." She held out the brightly colored shopping bag. Elijah looked at it warily. "What's this?" "A peace offering," Vivian said softly. "Inside is a new pair of yellow rain boots for Zoe, exactly like the ones that got ruined yesterday, plus a few books I thought she might like. And for you, an offer." Elijah didn't take the bag. He crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "I appreciate the boots, Ms. Sterling. Really, I do, but I don't want your money, and I definitely don't want whatever job you're about to offer me." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know what I'm going to say. You want me on your payroll?" Elijah stated flatly, seeing right through her. "You saw what happened yesterday. You pulled my file, or at least whatever heavily redacted pages the DOD let you see. You think I'm some highly trained attack dog you can hire to stand outside your office and scare off Apex defense systems. I'm not. I'm a carpenter. You are a Tier 1 Delta Force operator who neutralized 3 heavily armed mercenaries in less than 5 seconds with a sugar dispenser." Vivian corrected him, stepping closer. "Don't insult my intelligence, Elijah, and I won't insult yours. Apex Defense Systems is escalating. They will try again. I need someone who thinks like them to dismantle their operations. I can pay you $1 million a year, $2 million, whatever you want to secure Zoe's future." At the mention of his daughter, Elijah's jaw clenched. The air between them grew thick with tension. "Zoe's future is right here," Elijah said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "In a quiet house, in a quiet neighborhood, far away from people holding guns. I spent 10 years in the dark, Ms. Sterling. I missed her first steps because I was freezing in a trench in the Hindu Kush. I buried my wife while wearing a dress uniform covered in medals that couldn't bring her back. I am done fighting other people's wars." Vivian saw the raw, unfiltered pain in his eyes. For all her wealth, all her power, she had never seen a man strip away his ego so completely. He wasn't afraid of Apex defense systems. He was terrified of failing his daughter. "I understand," Vivian said gently, placing the shopping bag on a clean wooden workbench. "I really do. I'm sorry for intruding on your peace, Elijah." She turned to leave, the sawdust crunching under her designer boots. "Ms. Sterling," Elijah called out just as she reached the edge of the house. She paused, looking back over her shoulder. Elijah's eyes were no longer on her. They were fixed on the street past her armored car. His stance had shifted, his shoulders squaring up, that terrifying, hyper-focused combat geometry returning in an instant. "Your bodyguard," Elijah said, his voice stripped of all emotion. "Is he carrying a long rifle in that vehicle?" And Vivian frowned, confused by the sudden change in his demeanor. "No, Walter just carries a standard sidearm." "Why?" "Because," Elijah muttered, dropping his towel and reaching for a heavy steel pry bar resting on his workbench. "The two men in the black utility van that just parked at the end of my street are—" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Vivian turned her head, following Elijah's gaze down the quiet suburban street. Parked flush against the curb, completely out of place among the station wagons and minivans, was a matte black Ford Transit van with heavily tinted windows. "How do you know what they have?" Vivian asked, her heart rate spiking. "Suspension," Elijah replied clinically, his eyes never leaving the vehicle. "The rear chassis is sitting too heavy for an empty work van. The driver hasn't cut the engine, and there's a reflection off the side mirror. Someone in the back is using an optical scope to watch this house." Vivian's blood ran cold. Apex Defense Systems. Victor Lockwood. The sociopathic CEO of Apex wasn't just coming after her. He was tying up loose ends. He had identified the man who ruined his hit at the cafe. "Get inside," Elijah ordered. It wasn't a request. It was a tactical command. "Walter is out there." Vivian started reaching for her phone. "Walter is a sitting duck in that Maybach," Elijah snapped, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the back door of the house. "If they have armor-piercing rounds, that luxury tank is just a coffin. Call him. Tell him to reverse out of the neighborhood and call the police. Do not engage." Vivian scrambled into the kitchen, her trembling fingers dialing Walter's number. She relayed the message frantically. Through the front window, she saw the Maybach engine roar to life, tires screeching as Walter slammed the heavy vehicle into reverse, peeling away from the curb to create distance and call for a tactical response team. "He's moving," Vivian breathed, watching the Maybach disappear around the corner. "Good. Now get down," Elijah said, hitting the light switches, plunging the first floor of the house into shadows. The silence that followed was suffocating. The cheerful suburban afternoon had morphed into a war zone. Elijah moved through his own kitchen with the silent grace of a ghost. As he passed the refrigerator, Vivian caught a glimpse of the family photos stuck to it with bright magnets. Zoe at 2 covered in birthday cake. Monique laughing on a beach. A picture of an older black couple standing on a porch in summer light. Elijah's parents frozen in a younger decade. A whole life pinned in plain sight. He didn't have his service weapons. The government didn't let operators take assault rifles home. All he had were the tools of a carpenter and the lethal ingenuity of a man who had survived a dozen impossible sieges. "Where is Zoe?" Vivian whispered, her chest heaving. "Upstairs, taking her afternoon nap in the back bedroom. The walls are lined with reinforced bookshelves. It's the safest room in the house." Elijah replied, his eyes scanning the front yard through the blinds. "I'm going to need you to go up there, lock the door, and stay with her. Do not let her look out the window." "Elijah, they're here because of me. My visit led them right to your door," Vivian said, guilt twisting in her stomach like a physical blade. "I brought this to your home." Elijah turned, looking at the billionaire CEO. She was terrified, stripped of her corporate armor, just a woman standing in a dark kitchen. "Apex was tracking me since yesterday," Elijah corrected her softly. "They used facial recognition off the street cameras. You just happened to show up for the party. Now go upstairs, Vivian. Keep my daughter safe." It was the first time he had used her first name. The command was so absolute, so filled with trust, that Vivian didn't hesitate. She kicked off her heavy boots to move silently and ran up the wooden stairs. Outside, the side door of the black transit van slid open. 4 men stepped out onto the quiet Jamaica Plain Street. They weren't dressed like the Café thugs. These men wore dark civilian clothing, heavy Kevlar vests hidden under windbreakers, and carried compact PDWs, personal defense weapons suppressed for silent close-quarters combat. Leading them was Dalton Reeves, known in the private military underworld as the Wraith. Reeves was an ex-CIA wet-work specialist who had been dishonorably discharged for excessive cruelty. He didn't care about the money. He enjoyed the hunt. Victor Lockwood had paid him a fortune to erase the billionaire and the ghost who had embarrassed Apex Defense Systems. "Target is inside," Reeves muttered into his earpiece, gesturing to his men. The bodyguard ran. "We have 3 minutes before local law enforcement responds to his call. Breaching team take the front. Flankers take the back. Leave no one breathing." Elijah watched them move across his lawn. 4 hostiles suppressed automatic weapons body armor. He looked down at his hands. He was holding a 22-ounce framing hammer and a heavy-duty pneumatic nail gun, its air compressor hose trailing behind him. It was a joke compared to what the mercenaries were carrying. But Elijah Brooks had a distinct advantage. He knew the terrain. Every creaky floorboard, every blind corner, every sightline in this house was etched into his brain. He had built this house to be a sanctuary for his daughter, and heaven help the men who tried to tear it down. The front doorknob rattled. Then a heavy, silenced shotgun blast blew the deadbolt clean off its hinges. The reinforced oak door kicked open. The siege had begun. The first mercenary stepped through the shattered front door, sweeping the hallway with the laser sight of his weapon. The hallway was completely dark, the afternoon sun blocked by the heavy blackout curtains Elijah had pulled shut. Mistake number 1, Elijah thought from the shadows of the living room. Never enter a fatal funnel without a flashbang. As the mercenary took his second step into the foyer, his boot snagged on a nearly invisible line of high-tension builder's twine Elijah had strung across the baseboards in seconds. The man stumbled, his balance compromised his weapon dipping toward the floor. Before the mercenary could recover, Elijah struck. He didn't shoot. He didn't yell. Elijah lunged from the darkness of the living room archway, swinging the heavy framing hammer in a brutal upward arc. The steel claw caught the mercenary under the jawline, bypassing the Kevlar vest entirely. The crunch of bone was sickeningly loud. The man crumpled instantly, his fingers spasming on the trigger, sending a burst of suppressed rounds harmlessly into the hardwood floor. Elijah caught the falling man by the tactical vest, dragging him silently behind the drywall partition before the second man through the door could register what had happened. "Echo 1 status." Reeves's voice crackled over the downed man's radio. Silence. The second man cautiously entered his weapon, raised his eyes wide behind his tactical goggles. He swept the living room, but Elijah was already gone. He had moved through the open concept kitchen, flanking the intruder. Upstairs, Vivian sat on the floor of the nursery, her back pressed against the heavy oak door. Zoe was awake, clutching her stuffed bear, her big eyes wide with fear. "Vivian," Zoe whispered, "why is it so loud?" Vivian pulled the little girl into her lap, wrapping her arms tightly around her. She could feel her own heart pounding, but she forced a gentle, reassuring smile onto her face. "It's just some construction work, sweetie. Your dad is fixing the house. We're going to play a game of hide and seek up here until he's done okay." "Daddy is strong," Zoe said, burying her face in Vivian's trench coat. "Mommy used to say Daddy could lift the whole sky." "Yes, he is," Vivian whispered, tears prickling her eyes. "He is the strongest man I know." Downstairs, the battle was a terrifying dance of shadows and violence. The second mercenary crept into the kitchen, his boots crunching softly on the sawdust Elijah had deliberately kicked across the linoleum. He rounded the center island, his gun raised. Thwack! A 3-inch galvanized steel nail buried itself to the hilt into the mercenary's kneecap. The man let out a muffled shriek of agony, dropping to one knee. Elijah was crouched on top of the heavy wooden cabinets holding the pneumatic nail gun. Before the mercenary could aim his weapon upward, Elijah dropped down directly onto the man's shoulders, using his full body weight to drive the mercenary face first into the granite countertop. The man went limp. 2 down, 2 to go. Suddenly, the back window shattered. The flanking team had arrived. Reeves and the final mercenary stepped through the broken glass into the mudroom, their weapons raised. "He's not a civilian," Reeves shouted, seeing his 2 downed men. "Light the place up. Wall bang the whole floor." The 2 mercenaries opened fire. Suppressed or not, the sheer volume of 5.56 rounds tore through the house like a hurricane. Drywall exploded into clouds of white dust. Framed photos shattered. Wood splintered. Elijah dove behind the thick, load-bearing brick fireplace just as a line of bullet holes stitched across the wall where his head had been a fraction of a second prior. "Pin him down," Reeves ordered, advancing slowly through the dust cloud. Elijah was trapped. He had the nail gun, but the compressor hose had been severed by a stray bullet. He had the hammer, and he had a dead man's PDW lying 10 feet away in the open. Calculate, his mind whispered. Distance 20 feet. Hostiles 2. Armor heavy. Vulnerabilities limited. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy cast-iron plumb bob attached to a thick string, a tool used for finding perfect vertical alignment in framing. It weighed almost 2 pounds. He waited for the pause in their gunfire. The distinct click-clack of a magazine change echoed through the dust. "Now!" Elijah swung the plumb bob like a medieval flail, hurling it around the corner of the fireplace. The heavy iron weight smashed directly into the tactical goggles of the third mercenary, shattering the tempered glass and blinding him in one eye. The man screamed, staggering backward and firing wildly into the ceiling. Using the distraction, Elijah dove across the open floor, sliding across the sawdust. He grabbed the downed mercenary's PDW, rolling onto his back, and fired a precision 3-round burst. The bullets struck the blinded mercenary in the unarmored gap under his armpit. He hit the floor hard. Only Reeves remained. The Wraith was a professional. He didn't panic. He immediately ducked behind the heavy oak dining table, kicking it over for cover. "You're good, Brooks!" Reeves yelled over the ringing silence, his voice dripping with adrenaline. "Delta right, only a unit guy moves like that in a kill house. But you're out of practice. You're bleeding." Elijah looked down. A piece of shrapnel from the shattered brick fireplace had embedded itself deeply into his left thigh. Blood was soaking through his denim jeans. He didn't feel the pain. The adrenaline was masking it, but his mobility was compromised. "You made a mistake coming here, Reeves," Elijah called back, his voice an icy monolith. "You brought a war to my daughter's house." "Lockwood pays double for the kid," Reeves taunted, trying to draw Elijah out. "Maybe I'll take her with me when I finish you." The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elijah's eyes went completely dead. He didn't just want to survive anymore. He wanted to eradicate the threat. There is a line that exists in most decent men, a line so quiet you might never know it is there until someone steps over it. It isn't drawn around money or pride or even their own life. It is drawn around the people they have chosen to protect. Cross that line and the rules change. The negotiation ends. The reasonable man you spoke to a moment ago disappears, and something older and far less polite takes his place. Whatever else Dalton Reeves had done in his life, this was the mistake that ended it. Elijah pulled the pin on a flashbang grenade he had stripped from the first mercenary's vest. He didn't throw it over the table. He rolled it like a bowling ball, banking it off the baseboard, so it bounced directly behind Reeves's cover. Reeves saw it at the last second. Son of a bang! The blinding flash of magnesium and the deafening concussive boom rocked the house. Reeves squeezed his eyes shut, turning away from the blast, his ears bleeding. Through the blinding white smoke, a shadow moved. Elijah didn't shoot him. He wanted this up close. He vaulted the overturned dining table, tackling the disoriented ex-CIA operative to the floor. Reeves struggled wildly, pulling a combat knife from his hip, slicing it across Elijah's forearm. Elijah didn't even flinch. He pinned Reeves's knife arm with his knee, grabbed the man by the tactical vest, and drove his fist into Reeves's face with the terrifying force of a man protecting his only reason for living. Once, twice, 3 times. Reeves went completely limp, his jaw broken unconscious. Silence descended on the house once more, broken only by the hiss of a broken water pipe and the wail of police sirens rapidly approaching in the distance. Walter had made the call. The cavalry was here. Elijah slowly stood up, breathing heavily. He dropped the captured rifle to the floor. He was bleeding from his leg and his arm, covered in white drywall dust, looking like a demon emerging from the underworld. He ignored the pain. He ignored the sirens. He turned and limped up the stairs. "Vivian," Elijah called out, knocking gently on the nursery door. "It's me. It's over. You can open the door." The lock clicked. Vivian pulled the door open. When she saw him covered in blood and dust, his face exhausted but victorious, a dam broke inside her. She didn't care about the blood. She stepped forward and threw her arms around his neck, hugging him fiercely. Elijah froze for a second, unaccustomed to the sudden affection, but then slowly, gently wrapped his uninjured arm around her waist. "Daddy!" Zoe cried, pushing past Vivian and latching onto his good leg. "You fixed the loud noises." Elijah dropped to his knees, wincing as his injured thigh bent, and pulled his daughter into a desperate embrace. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and the coconut oil Monique had taught him to use for her edges, anchoring himself back to reality. "I fixed it, Bug. I fixed it," Elijah whispered, kissing her head. Vivian stood above them, watching the lethal operator weep silently into his daughter's shoulder. She realized in that moment that Victor Lockwood had made a fatal miscalculation. He hadn't just angered a former soldier, he had awakened a sleeping dragon. Elijah looked up at Vivian, his hazel eyes burning through the dust and exhaustion. The quiet carpenter was dead. The operator was back. "They won't stop," Elijah said softly, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Lockwood knows where I live. He knows about Zoe. As long as Apex Defense Systems exists, my daughter is a target." "What do we do?" Vivian asked, her voice steady, ready to back his play with every billion she had. Elijah slowly stood up, picking Zoe up in his arms. He looked at the shattered remains of his quiet life, and then back at the billionaire CEO. "We don't hide anymore, Vivian," Elijah said, the promise of absolute destruction laced in his words. "You wanted to hire me to dismantle their operations. Consider my contract signed. We are going to burn Apex Defense Systems to the ground. Take a small breath here before the next storm. Most of us will never have to fight off 4 armed men in our own kitchen, and thank goodness for that. But almost all of us at some point will have to choose between hiding from a problem and standing up to it. The truth is, peace is not always something we are given. Sometimes it is something we have to protect with patience, with honesty, with the small daily courage of being present for the people who depend on us. Whatever you are facing today, if it is asking you to grow a little braver for someone you love, that is not a curse. That is a calling, and it is one of the quieter, more honorable reasons we are here. By nightfall, the quiet street in Jamaica Plain was completely sanitized. Vivian did not rely on the Boston Police Department to handle a mess created by a private intelligence firm. Instead, she activated a sterling aerospace crisis containment protocol. Within 20 minutes of the siege ending, 2 unmarked heavy-duty box trucks rolled onto the block. A team of 12 men dressed in municipal utility uniforms systematically removed the unconscious mercenaries, swept the property for shell casings, and patched the shattered doors. Vivian, Elijah, and a sleeping Zoe were already gone, seated in the back of a modified Lenco Bearcat armored transport heading north toward Quincy. Elijah sat in silence, pressing a sterile gauze pad tight against his left thigh. A Sterling field medic had removed the brick shrapnel, flushed the wound with saline, and sealed it with dermal adhesive and steri strips, but the muscle throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. He stared at his daughter, who was curled up comfortably on one of the leather bench seats, her head resting on Vivian's lap. Vivian was softly stroking Zoe's hair, careful not to disturb the careful work of those 2 yellow ribbons. Her usually sharp, calculating eyes were softened by profound exhaustion. "Where are we going?" Elijah asked, his voice rough from the drywall dust he had inhaled during the firefight. "Sterling Facility Delta," Vivian replied quietly, careful not to wake the little girl. "It's an underground research and development bunker beneath our main manufacturing plant. It has Class A blast doors, independent air supply, and a dedicated server node. Apex Defense Systems could hit the facility with a bunker buster bomb, and we wouldn't even spill our coffee." Elijah nodded. "Good. Zoe needs to stay there until this is finished." Vivian looked up from the child. "And what exactly is this Elijah Victor Lockwood? Has hundreds of heavily armed contractors on his payroll. He operates out of a fortified 40-story skyscraper in Cambridge. You are one man with a stitched-up leg." "Lockwood relies on the illusion of security," Elijah stated, leaning back against the cold steel of the transport wall. His men are mercenaries. They fight for a paycheck. They like easy targets, intimidation, and overwhelming numbers. When you introduce a predator into their environment, someone who isn't there to negotiate or surrender, that illusion shatters very quickly. The Bearcat descended a long, spiraling concrete ramp passing through 3 automated checkpoints before coming to a halt in a brightly lit subterranean garage. Walter was waiting for them on the loading dock. Over the next 4 hours, the bunker transformed into a war room. Vivian took over the central terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboards as she accessed Sterling Aerospace's proprietary satellite networks. She pulled up the architectural schematics for the Apex Defense Systems tower, displaying them on a massive wall-mounted digital map. Lockwood's entire operation is housed in the top 5 floors of the Cambridge Tower, Vivian explained, pointing a laser pen at the glowing blue hologram. Floors 35 through 39 are administration and logistics. Floor 40 is his executive penthouse and the primary server farm holding the data for his illegal Black Ops contracts. The building is a fortress. Keycard access, only biometric scanners in the elevators, and a dedicated security detail of 40 men on rotation. Elijah stood in front of a long steel workbench evaluating the equipment Walter had pulled from the Sterling security armory. It was top-tier real-world gear. There was no Hollywood nonsense here. Elijah stripped off his blood-stained shirt and began layering his equipment. First, a moisture-wicking combat shirt, followed by a Cry Precision jumpable plate carrier, JPC, loaded with level 4 ceramic trauma plates, capable of stopping armor-piercing rifle rounds. He strapped a custom Kydex holster to his right thigh, holstering a heavily modified Glock 19X equipped with a red dot optic and a surefire weapon light. They have a thermal imaging grid covering the roof. Vivian continued, watching him gear up. You can't jump in. The lobby is reinforced glass and steel. How are you getting in? The HVAC system, Elijah replied mechanically, checking the action on his primary weapon, a compact suppressed Sig Sauer MCX Rattler, chambered in 300 blackout. It was a weapon designed specifically for devastating close-quarters combat. Building that size requires massive industrial air intake vents. They are located on the ground floor alleyway. I cut the grate, navigate the primary duct, and climb the service ladder to floor 35. Walter frowned. That's a straight vertical climb of over 300 feet with 50 pounds of gear. You're injured. I'll manage, Elijah said, his voice entirely detached from his physical pain. He loaded a heavy subsonic 30-round magazine into the Rattler and slapped the bolt catch. The weapon chambered around with a satisfying metallic click. He walked over to a cot in the corner of the room where Zoe was sleeping soundly under a thick wool blanket. Elijah knelt down, his tactical gear creaking slightly. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from her forehead, then pressed his thumb softly to the small silver pendant Monique had bought for Zoe on her first birthday, still resting at the base of her throat. He lingered there for a long moment, memorizing the steady rhythm of her breathing. Vivian stood a few feet away, watching the profound tenderness of the lethal operator. "I will protect her, Elijah," Vivian whispered. "I swear it." Elijah stood up, turning to face the billionaire CEO. The exhausted patient father was gone completely now. His eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of mercy. "I know you will," Elijah said. He pulled a black balaclava over his head, leaving only his eyes visible, and strapped a pair of 4-tube panoramic night vision goggles, GPNV-G18, to his fast helmet. "Keep an open comms channel. I need you to loop their internal security cameras once I breach the server room. I'll send you the signal." "Understood," Vivian said. Elijah turned and walked toward the heavy blast doors, the suppressed rifle hanging comfortably against his chest. The ghost was going to war. At 2 a.m., a relentless, freezing rain battered the glass exterior of the Apex Defense Systems tower in Cambridge. In the dark, narrow alleyway behind the skyscraper, a shadow detached itself from the brick wall. Elijah moved with absolute silence, his boots making no sound on the wet asphalt. He approached the massive industrial steel grating that covered the building's primary air intake. He didn't waste time trying to pick the heavy padlock. He drew a specialized battery-powered thermal cutting torch from his tactical harness. The blue-white flame hissed violently against the rain, melting through the hardened steel hinges in less than 20 seconds. Elijah caught the heavy grate before it could fall and clang against the concrete, setting it down gently. He slipped into the pitch-black ventilation duct. The smell of old dust freon and ozone filled his nostrils. He activated a dim red-filtered headlamp and began crawling through the cramped, galvanized steel tunnel. The air pressure was immense, pushing against him like a physical hand. After 50 yards, the horizontal duct opened up into the cavernous central maintenance shaft. Elijah looked up. A narrow, rusted service ladder stretched vertically into the darkness, vanishing hundreds of feet above him. His left thigh screamed in protest as he transferred his weight onto the first rung. The muscle fibers burned and the stitched wound pulled taut, but Elijah forced the pain into a small, locked box in the back of his mind. He began to climb rung by rung, minute by minute. The physical exertion was staggering. Sweat poured down his face under the balaclava, soaking his combat shirt. His hands, calloused from years of carpentry, gripped the cold steel with unyielding force. He didn't look down. He just counted the numbers painted on the concrete wall. Floor 10, floor 20, floor 30. Somewhere around floor 25, the old hymn his grandmother used to sing drifted back through his mind, slow and unhurried, the same one he had hummed into Zoe's hair at the cafe. He kept climbing. By the time he reached the maintenance hatch for the 35th floor, his arms were trembling from lactic acid buildup and his breathing was heavy and ragged. He hung from the ladder with one arm, using his free hand to unlatch the access panel. He pushed it open a fraction of an inch. Light spilled into the dark shaft. Elijah peered through the crack. He was looking down a long, carpeted corridor. 2 Apex Defense Systems guards, armed with submachine guns and wearing heavy plate carriers, were stationed by the elevator banks, drinking coffee and chatting quietly. Elijah pulled his panoramic night vision goggles down over his eyes and pressed the activation button. The world instantly shifted into a bright, hyper-detailed phosphor. He reached up and unscrewed the halogen bulb illuminating the hallway directly above the access hatch, plunging his immediate vicinity into total darkness. Elijah slipped silently out of the hatch, his rubber-soled boots touching the carpet without a sound. He raised the suppressed cig rattler to his shoulder. He wasn't here to arrest anyone. These men were complicit in a corporate murder ring. 2 heavy subsonic 300 blackout rounds left the barrel with nothing more than the mechanical clatter of the bolt group and a hiss of compressed gas. The round struck the first guard squarely in the center of his chest plate, the sheer kinetic transfer dropping him instantly, knocking the wind out of his lungs and bruising his ribs severely. Before the second guard could react to his partner falling, Elijah had already transitioned his aim. The second guard went down hard, clutching his ruined Kevlar vest, gasping for air. Elijah moved forward like a wraith, securing their weapons and zip-tying their wrists before they could even understand they had been breached. He pressed the push-to-talk button on his shoulder radio. "Vivian, I'm on 35, commencing vertical sweep." "Copy that, Elijah." Vivian's crisp voice crackled in his earpiece. "Security patrols are heavy on 38. You have an 8-man sweep team moving down the eastern stairwell." "Understood." Elijah bypassed the elevators entirely, moving to the western stairwell. He flowed upward, clearing each landing with meticulous fatal geometry. He was a master of close-quarters battle, moving with an economy of motion that made the highly paid mercenaries look like amateurs. On the 38th floor, Elijah encountered the heavy resistance Vivian had warned him about. He cracked the stairwell door. The open-plan office layout was bathed in emergency lighting. 4 guards were sweeping the cubicles, their weapon-mounted flashlights cutting erratic beams through the gloom. Elijah didn't engage in a prolonged firefight. He relied on shock speed and violence of action. He tossed a stun grenade over the cubicle walls. The deafening crack and blinding flash sent the guards reeling, shouting in confusion. Elijah breached the door, instantly sweeping the room left to right. He fired on the move, his red dot optic tracking smoothly from target to target. He aimed exclusively for their body armor. He was neutralizing threats, crushing ribs, and rendering them combat ineffective without executing them in cold blood, though the impact of the heavy subsonic rounds left them groaning and incapacitated on the carpet. In less than 3 minutes, he had cleared the 38th and 39th floors, leaving a trail of zip-tied, bruised, and terrified mercenaries in his wake. Apex Defense Systems had trained these men to intimidate civilians and executives. They had no idea how to fight a Tier 1 operator in his natural element. Elijah approached the final obstacle, the reinforced biometric security doors leading to the 40th floor, the executive penthouse.
"Vivian,"
Elijah whispered.
"I'm at the gates. Give me 10 seconds,
Vivian replied. "I'm injecting a brute force algorithm into their local mainframe via the data lines, bypassing the retinal scanner now." The heavy maglocks on the reinforced doors disengaged with a loud metallic thunk. Elijah kicked the doors open, his weapon raised, stepping into the belly of the beast. The 40th floor was a stark contrast to the sterile cubicles below. This was a monument to corporate arrogance. Polished obsidian floors, imported mahogany paneling, and a sweeping panoramic view of the Boston skyline. At the far end of the massive executive suite stood Victor Lockwood. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, wearing a bespoke tailored suit that cost more than most people made in a year. Behind him sat the massive server banks that held the encrypted ledgers of his illegal operations. Lockwood wasn't alone. Standing between Elijah and the CEO were Lockwood's personal elite guards, 4 massive men wearing heavy level 4 assault armor ballistic face masks and carrying fully automatic assault rifles. These weren't standard contractors. These were the killers Lockwood kept close. "Dalton Reeves told me you were good," Lockwood sneered, sipping from a crystal glass of scotch. He didn't look afraid. He looked annoyed. "He said you moved like a ghost, but you're just a man, Brooks. A tired, bleeding man who broke into the wrong building." Elijah didn't say a word. He didn't engage in the villain's monologue. He simply dropped his empty primary rifle to its sling, simultaneously drawing his Glock 19X from his thigh holster in a blisteringly fast transition. The elite guards raised their rifles, but Elijah was already moving. He sprinted laterally, sliding across the polished obsidian floor, using a massive marble pillar for cover, just as a hail of 5.56mm gunfire shattered the glass walls behind him. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Marble chips flew like shrapnel. Elijah counted the shots, waiting for the inevitable pause as they adjusted their firing lines. When the break came, he pivoted sharply around the pillar. He didn't aim for their heavy chest plates. He aimed for the vulnerable joints in their armor, the femoral arteries in the thighs, the unarmored gaps under their arms. He fired 4 rapid precision shots. 2 guards screamed and collapsed, dropping their rifles as 9mm hollow-point rounds shattered their knee joints. The remaining 2 charged the pillar, abandoning standard tactics in their rage. Elijah met the first one head-on. He parried the barrel of the guard's rifle away with his left forearm, stepping inside the man's guard, and drove the heavy steel base plate of his pistol magazine directly into the guard's exposed throat. The man dropped, gagging for air. The final guard tackled Elijah around the waist, driving him hard into the mahogany desk. Elijah's injured thigh erupted in fresh agony, but he ignored it. He wrapped his arm around the guard's neck in a vicious blood-choked guillotine, leveraging his body weight until the massive man went limp and unconscious. Silence fell over this penthouse, broken only by the groans of the downed men and the steady hum of the server racks. Elijah slowly stood up, his breathing heavy, his knuckles bruised. He ejected the half-empty magazine from his pistol, slammed a fresh one home, and racked the slide. He turned his weapon on Victor Lockwood. The arrogance had completely vanished from Lockwood's face. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the obsidian floor. He took a stumbling step backward, his back hitting the server racks. The illusion of his power had been utterly demolished in less than 60 seconds.
"Wait,"
Lockwood stammered, raising his hands, his voice trembling violently. "Listen to me. You don't have to do this. Sterling is paying you right. Whatever she's paying you, I'll triple it. $10 million wire transfer right now to an offshore account. You and your daughter can disappear. You'll never have to worry about anything again. Elijah walked toward him slowly, his boots crunching over the broken glass. He stopped 2 feet away from the billionaire, the muzzle of his pistol aimed squarely at Lockwood's chest. "You sent men with guns into my daughter's home." Elijah said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that promised absolute destruction. "You don't get to buy your way out of that." Elijah reached out, grabbed Lockwood by the lapels of his custom suit, and slammed him brutally against the metal casing of the servers. Lockwood gasped in pain, terrified out of his mind. And here, for one beat, look at the picture. A man in a $10,000 suit pinned against his own servers by a man who hours earlier was building a cedar deck and braiding his daughter's hair. So much of what we call power is really just decoration. The titles, the towers, the private cars, the cold smiles in the boardroom. Real power, the kind that holds up when things actually break, is something else. It is who shows up when the lights go out. It is what someone is willing to lose to keep their promises. It is harder to buy than people like Victor Lockwood ever understand right up until the moment it walks into their office and disagrees with them. "Vivian," Elijah said into his radio, "I have the servers. Start the download now." Vivian's voice replied, a note of fierce triumph in her tone. "I have their financial ledgers, I have the assassination contracts, I have the bribes to federal officials. Elijah Apex Defense Systems is finished. The FBI will be kicking down Lockwood's door in less than 10 minutes. Elijah let go of Lockwood, allowing the ruined CEO to slide down the servers to the floor, sobbing in terror and defeat. Elijah holstered his weapon. The job was done. The morning sun filtered through the brand-new reinforced windows of the Jamaica Plain House. The smell of freshly brewed dark roast coffee filled the kitchen, mingling with the scent of sawdust. Elijah stood at the kitchen island dressed in a soft flannel shirt and clean jeans. His leg still had a slight limp, but the wound was healing. He was carefully assembling a small wooden dollhouse, testing the hinges on a miniature front door, the kind of patient work his own father had once shown him on a winter afternoon a lifetime ago. The front doorbell rang. Elijah walked to the door and opened it. Vivian Sterling stood on his porch. She wasn't wearing a tailored corporate pantsuit today. She wore a simple, elegant cashmere sweater and a pair of dark jeans. Without the heavy burden of corporate warfare hanging over her, she looked softer, brighter. "Walter is parked around the block," Vivian said with a warm smile. "He refused to park the Maybach on your street. Said it was bad for your property value." Elijah chuckled, stepping aside to let her in. "He's probably right. How are the markets today?" "Apex Defense Systems officially filed for bankruptcy this morning," Vivian said, stepping into the kitchen and taking a seat at the island. "Victor Lockwood was indicted on 42 federal charges. He's going to spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison." "Good," Elijah said, simply returning to his woodworking. "I came to give you this," Vivian said, pulling a heavy sealed envelope from her purse and sliding it across the granite counter. "Your contractor fee as promised." Elijah didn't look at the envelope. He kept sanding a piece of cedar. "I told you, Vivian. I didn't do it for the money. I did it to keep Zoe safe." "I know," Vivian said softly, watching his large, rough hands work with such delicate precision. "But the money is yours. Put it in a trust for her. Send her to college. Let her buy as many $20 hot chocolates as she wants." Elijah finally stopped working. He looked up at Vivian, seeing past the billionaire CEO to the woman who had sat on the floor of a dark nursery and comforted a terrified child. "Zoe asked about you this morning." Elijah said, a genuine, rare smile touching the corners of his mouth. "She wanted to know if the pretty lady in the trench coat was coming back to play hide and seek. She said you smell like the kind of grandma in her storybooks. I'm choosing to interpret that as a compliment on your perfume." Vivian laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. A warm, surprised sound. She felt a sudden, unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. She had spent her life acquiring companies and building empires, but sitting in this quiet kitchen surrounded by sawdust and peace felt like the greatest victory she had ever achieved. On the wall behind Elijah, a small framed photograph caught her eye. Monique Brooks in a hospital scrub top, beaming with newborn Zoe in her arms, and a younger Elijah leaning in over both of them, his forehead pressed against his wife's. Vivian understood in that moment that this kitchen was not where Elijah's family had ended. It was where it kept going quietly every single day. "Well," Vivian said, a playful glimmer in her eye, "I do have a very clear schedule today, and I happen to be exceptionally good at hide and seek." Elijah poured 2 mugs of coffee, sliding one across the counter to her. "Then I guess," Elijah said, his voice dropping to a softer, gentler tone, "you should stay." One last quiet word before we close the door on this story. Most of us will never take down a tower. Most of us will never face 4 men in our own kitchen or stand under fluorescent light in a hospital corridor receiving the worst news of our lives. But all of us, every single one, will at some point be asked to keep going after something has broken us, to pour coffee for a guest, to braid a child's hair, to pick up a hammer and finish a deck, to choose on a small Tuesday morning to be patient with a stranger who is having a worse day than we are. That is where lives are actually built, not in the explosions, in the kitchens after the explosions. If anything about Elijah and Zoe stayed with you, let it be that. The world will not always be fair to you, but you can still be kind. You can still be present. And that in the end is the kind of power no one can take away. And that is how you dismantle a bully's empire. Did you love watching Elijah completely humiliate the arrogant Victor Lockwood and prove that real power doesn't come from expensive suits, but from what you're willing to protect? The way Elijah and Vivian teamed up was absolutely iconic, a true power couple. If you want more stories of everyday heroes bringing ultimate justice to the corrupt elite, make sure you smash that like button. Drop a comment below telling me your favorite part of Elijah's tactical takedown. Share this story with your friends and hit subscribe so you never miss another thrilling drama on the channel. See you next time.